Good afternoon, and thank you everybody for being here and for your patience. New York traffic, am I right?
I'm afraid so.
So before we get started with our guest, I wanted to give you a quick update. You remember last time I was here, we had Councilmember Julie Menon, and you all brought the concern about the safety issues outside. She has already gotten in touch with the Department of Transportation. They are currently evaluating the request, and hopefully next time I come back here, I will have an answer for you. So how's that for quick action for Councilmember Menon? Today our...
I will agree with quick action
when it's done, right? That's smart. Trust but verify.
Trust.
So our guest today is Borough President Mark Levine. Let's give him a big hand.
Thank you.
So to start us off, I'm going to have you talk to us about the historic role of Borough President and what it is today, because a lot of people probably do not know what a Borough President actually does. But you've told me you have the best job in New York City. So tell me why.
I stand by that statement. Chris, thank you for inviting me, and hello Inspire. It's wonderful to be able to spend a little bit of time with all of you talking about the future of our borough and our city at this very exciting time. I have the honor to be your Borough President, a role I've held since January. And it is a job unique to New York City, but it's different from when some of you might remember in decades past. There was a big change when the Supreme Court struck down New York City's form of government in 1989. And the role of the Borough President was changed dramatically. It used to be part of something called the Board of Estimate, which really ran New York City. Nowadays, we still have very many important roles. First, in the question of land use, what we can build where we can build a tall building, where we need to keep things at a more modest height, where we can build housing versus commercial, preservation, all of that runs through the Borough President's office. We have significant budget authority. We can award money to improve libraries and parks and cultural centers and schools, etc. We can introduce legislation in the City Council, not vote, but introduce legislation. And finally, we have over 1,000 appointments to everything from community boards, to the city's pension funds, to the Economic Development Corporation, to hospital advisory boards, and too many other boards and bodies to mention. It all adds up to a really important platform for organizing, putting forth an agenda for this borough, and making it happen. At a very important time for Manhattan, a challenging time for Manhattan, when we're coming out of this incredibly difficult 2.5, almost 3 years, which hit Manhattan brutally hard. The public health crisis, the economic shock, so much inequality that was exacerbated during this time. I'm still really optimistic about the future of the borough. I see signs of our comeback everywhere. There is no doubt we have challenges and more work to do. I'm sure we'll be talking about that. But this is a great time to be leading in the best borough in the world. I'm happy to talk to you about what we're working on in the job. Thank you, Chris.
Thank you. I appreciate your proactive optimism. During the beginning of the pandemic, people came to know you as one of the most trusted voices for accurate information about how they should conduct themselves during the pandemic, what to expect. So I kind of want to start us there. As we're headed into an expected winter COVID surge, people are frustrated because we're getting incredibly mixed messages, including from the government, about our risk factors, on a personal level, what public health mitigation strategies are being used, and how concerned people should actually be. So as we head into the winter, what should people here know about protecting themselves from COVID and what their risk actually is?
Well, it's both true that we have made enormous progress in our battle against COVID, and that COVID is still circulating in New York City. We're still seeing just under 2,000 cases a day. And how do you square all that? Well, we have tools we didn't have when we faced, for example, the Omicron surge earlier in this year. We have treatments like Paxlovid, which are incredibly effective. We have ample supply of testing and home tests. We take that for granted now. We didn't have that during the Omicron surge. We have a hospital system which is not currently under the level of stress that it endured during the worst stages of this pandemic. We've learned a lot about how to prevent and treat COVID. But I mentioned that it's still circulating, and cases in fact are rising. We had a summer of decline in cases in New York City, and now you're seeing in New York City and in the Northeast, at best, a leveling off and probably a slight increase in cases. Why would that be? Well, colder weather, at least consistently now for the last couple of years, has been associated with an increase in cases. We expect to see that again as the weather gets cold. We've had a reduction in mitigation. People are wearing their masks less. People are avoiding crowded indoor gatherings less, and that of course facilitates the spread. And we have new variants which are more contagious than what we confronted even 6 months ago. So I think this remains a time for caution. Our most important tool remains vaccination. And on that front, we have great news. We have a new booster shot available. I hope many of you have gotten it, or if not, I hope you will, which is specifically formulated for the variants which are now circulating, which are part of the Omicron family. So it offers outstanding protection against severe illness and hospitalization. But unfortunately, very few people are getting that booster. Very few people are getting vaccines in general. Actually, I worry that's going to be the story for vaccines beyond COVID. I'm worried we're going to have a low flu vaccine take-up rate this year. And I think government needs to do more to change that. I think we need to be educating the public more about the ongoing need to stay up to date on your vaccine. Notice I say it that way, stay up to date. The question is no longer, have you been vaccinated? Because if you got a dose 2 years ago, you're not adequately protected. The question should be, are you up to date? That's the question we would ask about a flu shot. The fact that I got a flu shot a few years ago, that doesn't protect me in this flu season. That's why you should get it now. By the way, you can get both at the same time. I did. Many providers are offering both the booster for COVID and the flu shot. You get one in each arm. It's very easy. So I think this is a time for continued caution, but not a time for panic because of all the advances we've made. And I hope all of you have that balance in mind as you think about your own personal strategies going forward. Are we allowed to take questions yet?
Not yet, not yet.
Okay.
We have actually, wait, we will.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes,
This
by all
is
means, let's do it.
Were you pointing to me or?
I'm pointing to you and then to you.
Okay. This is a long-term care facility.
Yes.
I would think, and I don't know if this is,
It's on.
I would think that we would expect to have more involvement to be vaccinated here in this facility than we have to go out and go somewhere to get vaccines. Can you provide that for us?
Actually, the city has a program that will come to your home and vaccinate for anyone over age 65, and also anyone who is homebound who could be of any age. And they will send a clinician out. They will give you your booster, or if someone hasn't had their primary doses, they'll also vaccinate caregivers if they happen to be present. So that's an option for you here. But if your interest is in getting an actual kind of mobile clinic to set up in a space in the building, I don't know if that would be acceptable to the building, but I'd be happy to work on that. That might be the kind of thing that we can make happen. Is that your interest, having kind of a mobile vaccination clinic set up here on a given day?
That would be wonderful.
Yeah.
That would be terrific. And I
Okay.
think you'd be overwhelmed.
I'm very happy to hear that. So I will both pursue that, and I will share with Chris, who will share with you the way you can sign up, or anyone you know in New York City can sign up for the home-based vaccination program. That is a good option for people who are homebound in particular.
Last week, I received an email from Ginny saying that she's looking into getting vaccines on site. So that's in process apparently. That was about a week ago. I got an email.
Yeah, but the problem is, we heard before Labor Day that the booster would be available. And now here we are, last day of September, and I still get the response from Virginia, they're working on it. Well, my husband's gonna be 92. I would like to know, have a better answer than they're working on. I'd like to know if it's gonna be next week or whatever.
And is Virginia the building administrator?
Yeah.
Or someone? Okay, so Chris will connect her with my team, and if we can help expedite it, we will.
I will handle that today.
Thank you.
You got it.
We were asked to fill out some forms giving permission to be vaccinated, but then into our files, and after that, that was a few weeks ago, and we've heard nothing else since then.
All right, I will be in touch with.
Because there are such
Yes.
forms that you have to fill.
I actually don't work at Inspire. I produce events here, but I am invested in getting everybody vaccinated. So I will be on this today.
And if you look into getting the Moderna, so many places, Rite Aid only has Pfizer, CVS said, we have a shop in New Jersey where you can get Moderna. There are some Walgreens where you can get the Moderna booster, but it seems to be in New York City, difficult to come by the Moderna booster.
Can you explain the difference or efficacy of various brands of vaccines for boosters, or if there is one?
Sure. Well, you only have two options in the United States, which are Moderna and Pfizer. The regulatory distinction is the age eligibility. It doesn't really affect you guys, but Pfizer is available for 12 plus, and Moderna is available for 18 plus. I don't think there's conclusive evidence on significant difference in effectiveness between the two. There are some folks who have posited that mixing and matching has an advantage, so that if you got a primary series of Moderna, you'd want to do Pfizer, but there's not actually solid data for that. I think it's still somewhat elusive. The bottom line is the mRNA vaccines are incredibly effective, at least against severe illness and hospitalization, which is what we care about. But it appears that the new formulation, the so-called bivalent formulation, is even beyond that effective at preventing people from catching and spreading it, even as a mild form of the illness. So you really do want to get it if you can. I hear you about wanting it in sight, and we're going to work on that together.
And we have one more question back here. Yes, ma'am.
We're also talking about the flu shot. This is the first October 1st that I will not have had the flu shot in many, many years. And it's because I need a wheelchair van to take me someplace to get it. It makes it very difficult. And I didn't anticipate this. So that I think that we need to have flu shots set up here also.
That's something that I'll talk to Chris about as well. We did a mobile flu vaccination site in my district office on 125th Street yesterday. I realize that's a little inconvenient here, but it can be done. And we actually had Walgreens just come to my office. And they brought a team there, and they spent a day, and they did a few dozen people. So maybe Walgreens can come here. I'll make the ask.
Thank you,
Yeah,
Mark.
well, for my husband, we're on 93rd Street. To go to 92nd Street would be inconvenient. And I'm sure Nancy feels the same way. We need it right here. No question about
Okay.
that.
We'll-
Not for all the residents, but there's a substantial percentage of people who need it to be given right here.
Well, it looks like we've got our marching orders, Mark.
Yes, we do.
So next, I would like to ask a bit about another health crisis that we've experienced recently, which is the monkeypox crisis. I am under the impression that we're seeing a decent amount of improvement on that front. I know I've been vaccinated for monkeypox. Who should be vaccinated for monkeypox at this point?
Yeah, monkeypox has been around for 50 years or more. It's not a new disease. It's in the smallpox family. But there was some sort of change in the microbe in the last 6 months or so. It appears to make it far more contagious. And we did see outbreaks, particularly in Europe and then ultimately the United States. And Manhattan was the epicenter nationally here. It is a disease which anyone can catch and spread, generally through intimate skin-to-skin contact. So that can be through sexual partners, it can be through a healthcare worker and a patient, it can be through family members who live together and have a lot of intimate contact. It has overwhelmingly, though not exclusively, but probably about 98% of the cases have been spread within the community of gay and bisexual men in New York City. But there's good news that thanks to a vaccination campaign and good public outreach and some cautious behavior, the number of cases which had peaked at over 100 a day in New York City is down to I think not much more than 10. I don't know the exact number, but if it's more than 10, it's not much more than that. So we're making progress. The vaccine was enormously scarce over the summer, and now it's plentiful. So if you know someone, this might be a grandchild, a grandson, who's vulnerable, who might have heard it was very hard to get a vaccine, which it was at one point, let them know. You can just walk in. You don't need an appointment. We can share with you the locations. To me, it's a success story. We needed a success story after the horrible pandemic we've been through, and after a shaky start, we really did make great progress against this disease.
Thank you. And I have one final public health question before we completely switch gears. Poliovirus was found in the wastewater. We heard, a few weeks back that we declared emergency over this. What's the update on poliovirus?
Yes, well, there's been one paralytic case of polio, and I have to imagine for some of you even to have to grapple with this being in the headlines, it must be somewhat jarring. Like, are we time traveling back to the 1950s here? Polio never really went away. Humanity didn't entirely defeat it, but it has been making something of a comeback in the last few years, partly because of the anti-vaccine movement. And that appears to be the cause of the outbreak we're experiencing in New York, which I don't want to overstate. Again, there's been one case of paralytic polio identified by a young man in his early 20s in Rockland County. But you can detect polio in the wastewater because polio is basically a digestive disease. So obviously it shows up in the wastewater. And it has shown up in the wastewater throughout the region, including in New York City. But most people who experience polio, thank God, do not get paralysis. It's about 1 in 200. And in fact, probably 3/4 of the people who have polio are asymptomatic, so they don't know it. So the presumption is that it is spreading at some level in New York City. If you have been vaccinated, then you are well protected, and there's no call for a booster. It's really nothing that you need to lose sleep over. But a surprisingly large number of people in New York City have not been vaccinated. The citywide rate is that 14% of children under the age of 5 have not been vaccinated, which is really a shockingly high number. In some zip codes, it's 40%. And again, this is largely an outgrowth of the anti-vaccine movement. And it is scary. Those children are at risk. So if you have someone in your family, in your world, who is unvaccinated for polio, express to them the urgency of doing it. Yes, paralysis is 1 in 200 cases, but you don't want your grandchild to be that one. So please tell them to get vaccinated.
We have a question.
What are the vaccine requirements for attending school in New York?
Interesting question.
What are they?
Related to polio or more broadly?
Broadly,
Yes.
polio and as well as others.
I'm not going to be able to recall the whole list, but there's a battery of vaccines. Obviously, mumps, measles, rubella, pertussis.
And is
And
it polio?
absolutely.
So how can we have 14% unvaccinated? Are they not going to school?
Several things. There was a religious exemption in New York State, which was being exploited. And that is presumably the way the 22-year-old who I mentioned who was paralyzed tragically, why he was not vaccinated as a child. This is a young man who was born around 2000. And at that time, you began to see an increase in people using the religious exemption. It got so bad that thankfully, New York State passed a law eliminating the religious exemption in 2019. So a lot of the people who are now unvaccinated are people who, prior to that moment, had parents opt out. But of course, 2019 was when the pandemic hit. So there were children who didn't go to school in person during that time, who weren't vaccinated and might otherwise have been forced to get vaccinated and didn't because they weren't walking through a school door. And I think it's also fair to say that perhaps the school system during the disruptions of COVID lost a step in enforcing that vaccine mandate for newly entering and newly enrolling students. I think they're trying to to recover. But I think the combination of the anti-vaccine movement, of the religious exemption, and disruptions of COVID led us to these figures. There's also people who were children abroad and have come here, and the picture around the world is more varied. It's not as bad as you might think. Most of the world is vaccinating for polio. In fact, some better than the United States. I don't want to go down the rabbit hole, but some are using the oral vaccine, which is easier to administer, but does have, it can mutate in the body and spread, and we're seeing some of those outbreaks. I won't go into that, but there are some in some cases it's people who are born abroad and came here. There are people who aren't really sure if they were vaccinated because they maybe don't have records or their parents never told them. There's no harm with getting a booster.
Right.
So really, if you're just incredibly confused and unable to confirm whether you personally were vaccinated or you know someone, I mean, you can get a titer to assess it, but really, you should probably just get a booster, and that's easy to do. You should just talk to your doctor about it. There's no downside to it. They're not really side effects, doesn't harm your body, so that's your backup.
Thank you very much. I told you the wealth of information here. Keeping to the subject of children and families, right now we're seeing what I call a manufactured crisis of migrants coming into New York, largely because they're being exploited for political reasons by other states. What are we doing to help ensure that we're upholding the human rights of the influx of people that are coming here? And what should we be doing to ensure that we're prepared for the fact that this is probably going to escalate as we head into an election season and we have, radicalized governors around the country that might start pulling these kinds of stunts?
Thank you, Chris, for this question. I want to clarify exactly who's coming to New York. Who are these migrants and why are they coming here? These are not undocumented immigrants. These are people who have come to the country and requested asylum, but they're waiting for their asylum case to be adjudicated, essentially, and they are permitted to remain in the country while that process plays out. In fact, they can even solicit a work permit while that process plays out, which can take a while because of backlogs in the immigration system. They are overwhelmingly from one country, Venezuela. They are secondarily from Cuba, Colombia, Nicaragua, and Haiti, and one or two others. But at least amongst those who are arriving to New York City, I would probably say 75% or more are from Venezuela. They are young, they are families, they are young adults, most in their 20s or 30s. And they're often trained in professions in their home countries. Many are fleeing because they dare to speak out against what I would call a dictatorship in Venezuela, and so that fear of being arrested, and they've come here. Many of them crossed the border into the southern states, and the governor of Texas decided, for his own cynical political reasons, that he was going to put them on buses to New York, often by misleading or coercing the migrants themselves, who, to give you a sense of why we know they're not coming here willingly in some cases, probably about a third of those who arrive in New York tell us, I have family ready to receive me in another city or state. I should be in Florida right now. I should be in Las Vegas right now. We are, by the way, reticketing those individuals and giving them a bus ticket to visit their family. But these are not people who, in many cases, chose to come to New York. They were coerced or, in some cases, outright tricked into getting on the bus and not given a choice. But they're coming in significant numbers. It's kind of fallen out of the news, but we're still getting about 4 to 5 buses a day coming into the Port Authority. The buses are full. That's 50 people per bus, so that's 200 plus a day. Multiply that times 7 days a week, and you can see the numbers get big really fast. We have probably had at this point close to 14,000 arrive. These are big numbers. And in past waves of immigration, there was immigrants arrived to New York City with a cousin or a friend or a brother-in-law who they could sleep in their couch until they could get themselves on their 2 feet. This is not the case with many of these arrivals. Again, because they either have no family in the U.S. or they have family in other parts of the country. So many of them have no place to sleep, and they are being accommodated in our homeless shelter system. A system which was filling up already, which was almost at capacity even before this summer, and now is full. The homeless shelter system in New York City is full, and buses are continuing to arrive at 4 to 5 a day. And this has created real challenges. Some of you remember in the peak of COVID, when we needed to house people, we filled up a bunch of hotels in Midtown. No tourists were coming, the hotels were empty. It was a great solution, right? We could quickly pivot. Tourism coming back, thank God. Not 100%, but it's probably 85% of what it was. So we don't even have that many empty hotels anymore. This is a big problem. And so what the mayor has announced, which is a little controversial, is that they're going to create a temporary receiving location for the migrants in the Bronx. This is going to be the first of several, probably. The first one's for single adults. And it's large tents, kind of like what you would see at a wedding, climate control, but in the parking lot at Orchard Beach. And they're building a 1,000-bed facility there, where the migrants will come from the bus, they'll go right there, they'll get food, there's a cafeteria there, they'll get medical care if they need it, clean clothes, a shower, all the services, and then either be reticketed to their final destination in another part of the country, connected to family members who might live in the metropolitan area, or if needed, be accommodated in the shelter system. There's a lot to do for these individuals. We have been organizing donation drives. We've been collecting clothes and toiletries and goods for children and newborns in both of our offices. Our office that I mentioned before on 125th Street. We have an office next to City Hall. There's been an outpouring of contributions. We've been organizing volunteers. But the truth is, I think this is going to continue at least to November 8th. And what is November 8th?
Election day.
That's Election Day. Because the governor of Texas, Greg Abbott, is clearly doing this for political reasons. And in his mind, based on his perverted calculus, this is a political win. And so we need to assume it's going to continue through November 8th. I wish the federal government was leading more on this, and if you want, I can talk about that. But in the meantime, I'm really proud that New York City has embraced these arrivals. I'm confident they're going to contribute to the city. I bet them the first question they ask me is, how can I get a job? I want to work. Can you help me work? These are people who are going to contribute. We have a shortage of employees in many sectors, and I think this could be a big win for New York City if we can just get over this difficult stage.
You talked a bit about the controversy around the mayor's plan. What's your perspective on the mayor's plan involving what some are calling tent cities?
Well, because the shelter system is full, we need some sort of emergency measures. I don't feel that Orchard Beach is the ideal location because it's so isolated, so there's no way for the migrants to access mass transit or get to a store, get to a job, for example. Now the administration is saying they're only going to be there for 1 to 4 days, but 1 to 4 days becomes 7 to 10 days, becomes 2 to 4 weeks, and so I do worry about that. I think we need to find other locations which are more accessible to mass transit, and I think that work is underway.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so important when we're talking about individuals who don't have access to mass transit. If you're not able to leave the location you're in, you're essentially imprisoned. And I think that that's a huge concern, and I'm glad you share that concern. I believe we have one question over here.
I thought the mayor had suggested that they take a cruise ship that's not being used, leave it at one of the docks, which would be in the middle of Manhattan, which would be a lot easier for people to do what you just said. I mean, they can accommodate 1,000 people on one of those ships, And what happened with that idea?
Yeah, cruise ship, you have individual rooms, you have a bathroom in every room, right? So it does fit for emergency accommodation purposes. I don't know what the status of those talks are. I know that the mayor's people have spoken to cruise ship companies. I just don't know if there's a ship available. I don't know if that's...
I thought that was what his plan was before the tent city.
I think there were early explorations. I don't know where they're at, but I think they determined that the tents could be mounted very quickly in a week or two, and that's underway. I think it's starting to take shape now already in Orchard Beach.
And keeping the focus a bit on politics, tell us about the initiative that your office has right now around the November elections and how you're doing something that I think is pretty unique for a borough president.
Well, thank you. New York State is a blue state, but the elections are surprisingly close. The Democrats are polling in the low 50s, and I am worried that Democrats are taking this election for granted. That think more right-wing Republicans in the suburbs are motivated, and that our side, my side, needs to wake up. And Manhattan actually is pretty key to any statewide race. You know, a lot of New York is fairly red outside of the metropolitan area, and Democrats win statewide because they run up very big margins in New York City, and in particular Manhattan. And there's also some competitive general elections in this borough, including, I think, in this neighborhood. Is Alex Boris's district covered here?
Yes, it is.
Okay, so there's even a competitive...
Oh, I'm so sorry. Redistricting. No, this is now Eddie Gibbs.
Ah, okay, got it. Well, there's several competitive legislative elections in Manhattan where Democrats are favored, but there is a Republican, and you don't want to be cavalier about the chances. So we started a campaign that we're calling Wake Up Democrats. We launched it this morning. We were at subway stops all over Manhattan with activists and elected officials and Democratic clubs, reminding people that Manhattan has to come out big. We're also going to be sending buses to swing districts in the New York City area, even in New York State. There are half a dozen competitive congressional races in New York State, arguably more than any other state, but also into nearby states like Pennsylvania. So we're going to be very active in the next 5 or 6 weeks, Chris, and we'll keep you posted on that great campaign.
Thank you very much. We're talking about, we have a question right here.
What do we need to know about absentee ballot being changed?
Call the Board of Elections.
Absolutely. First, the voting by absentee ballot has gotten easier in recent years. Now you have that we have what we call no excuse absentee ballots. You used to technically have to be like out of state or infirm, and but now it's not, anyone, any of you, any of us can apply for an absentee ballot. The last date to apply, do you know, Chris?
I do not.
Okay,
recall.
we're going to Google this and get back to you. I see.
I'll Google it right now while you're talking.
Yes, so you still have time. What's that?
November 2nd.
Is the last date to apply for an absentee ballot?
Sorry, it's either the first or second.
Okay, we're gonna figure this out right now. Now, one important thing to know is that if you request an absentee ballot, you can't. This is new. You can't then go show up and vote.
Right.
And sometimes people will request a ballot as kind of an insurance policy. And if they were around the day of the election day, you know, I'm just going to go in. But that rule has been tightened up, so you need to decide one or the other. And now, if you request a ballot, you can drop it off at the poll site. There's a little box there for it, right? So, you know, you're not going to be disenfranchised, but you do need to pick a lane, essentially. So anything else we should add on that?
I've got all our answers.
Okay.
So, in person, you can receive an absentee ballot 1 day before Election Day. If you request it by mail, you need to do so 15 days before Election Day. The same applies to online. And when you vote by absentee ballot, it needs to be postmarked and received within 7 days after Election Day.
If you registered as permanently disabled, then they send you absentee ballot
Yes.
for every election.
That's right,
And you can apply online, so.
Yes, you may apply online, and the same rules apply for applying online as for requesting it by mail. So same process, 15 days for either. Yes, sir?
I have a question about the guy who's running for governor.
His name is Lee Zeldin,
Yes,
and he's a Trumper.
yes.
So I think we need to keep all that in mind and generate some interest in participating in the election for governor in New York State.
Absolutely.
Thank you, sir. I couldn't agree more. He voted, he's in Congress now. He was in Congress when the vote came up to certify the 2020 presidential election. He voted no. So that makes him, in my opinion, an election denier, which to me is disqualifying. He also is called for a ban on abortions with no exception for rape or incest, and has various other extremist views on guns as well, which to me are quite alarming. This is typical of the caliber of candidates that Republicans are nominating up and down the ballot, even in New York. And this is why Democrats need to wake up and take this seriously, because the stakes could not be higher.
I knew we had another question.
If any of us are interested in getting on one of your buses, how do we go about doing that?
Wow, this is wonderful. Before we leave, we'll connect. I mean, there's a link where you can sign up, but before we leave, we'll chat. Thank you very much, sir. Appreciate that.
And I'm also going to pass information on to Evan, so anybody will be able to access this information after we leave as well, if you're interested in getting involved and helping turn out the vote.
Right.
So tell us a little bit about how you see the rest of your tenure as borough president, how you feel, because this is a very amorphous role, and you're an extremely proactive person. So what are your long-term goals for this role, aside from the fact that you've been dealing with numerous crises on numerous fronts? What do you want to accomplish?
There's a lot that we have to do. I have 3+ years left in this term, and with any luck, I'll have a re-election for 4 more. So I'm looking forward to being your borough president for a while. I'll just mention a few long-term things we're working on. We are, with regards to COVID, I think a big long-term effort is on indoor air quality. We know now that COVID spreads through the air. It's a respiratory disease, and there'll be more respiratory diseases that reach crisis level in the years to come. And New York City has done very, very little to establish standards for indoor air quality, whether it be in an office building or in an apartment. And so we think this should be considered something like the fire code. There should be standards that all buildings have to adhere to for airflow, exchange, and filtration. And we're working with a really broad panel of experts, including national experts, to make New York City the leader in establishing air quality standards, so that the next time the next pandemic or the next pathogen starts to hit us hard, we're going to be ready without having to go through all the reverse engineering that we did when COVID hit. I'm extremely worried about the shortage of affordable housing in Manhattan, and the way it's impacting young families who simply can't afford to live here. The average market rate rent for an apartment in the borough of Manhattan is now $5,200 a month, which for a young family is utterly impossible. And again, it means that probably many of your kids and grandkids can't live in Manhattan, and the rest of the boroughs are not much better. We simply have to build more housing and more affordable housing. And I think we need to change the culture and the rules around how and where we do that. It's just too hard to build housing in New York City. And you know, the market is in the end of the day going to determine the price. And if you don't have enough bananas, the price of bananas goes up. If you don't have enough gas, the price of gas goes up. If you don't have enough apartments, the price of apartments goes up. So we're working to use the tools of my office. As I mentioned earlier, we do have real influence on land use policy, on what you can build where. And so we're going to be using that for for the long-term fight to create more affordable housing. And then the last long-term thing I'll mention, Chris, is on climate and resiliency.
You beat me to the question.
Oh,
That was
really?
my
Well,
next
go
one.
ahead, ask the question.
Well, I don't know if you know this, but I was in Orlando, Florida on Wednesday.
Wow.
And I was sitting on a plane and the airport was about to shut down within an hour of me getting on that plane, and we weren't even sure we were gonna be able to take off. My sister got stranded, she thankfully is safe. You know, aside from flooding, like everything's okay. But it brings to mind, we live on an island here.
Yes, we do.
And weather is getting more extreme by the year, and it's gonna keep getting more extreme. And we already know that New York City's infrastructure overall is not prepared for that, especially around flooding. We saw last year the subways becoming completely inaccessible when we would have just too much rainfall because they would flood to a level that you could swim in, which of course is very not safe. No one should do that. What can we be doing to increase the resiliency here quickly? Because we have a lot of good long-term plans, but we're dealing with a crisis that's here right now.
Well, we have a two-front war here. We have to slow climate change and ultimately reverse it. And Manhattan has a role in that, which I'll talk about. But we have to deal with the fact that climate change is already here. It's not a hypothetical. And that we are vulnerable. We are on an island on the edge of the Atlantic Ocean. Hurricane Sandy, Superstorm Sandy was already a decade ago. We're coming up on the 10-year anniversary. We are woefully behind on protecting this island, protecting our infrastructure. And what we've seen in the last year or two is that the threat of extreme weather is not only from the river and the ocean, it's coming from above. We've now seen, we've had deadly flood events that simply occurred because of rain. And that we're seeing parts of Manhattan that are elevated. Washington Heights has had terrible flooding that's gone viral on social media, simply because we had rain that fell at a rate of 1 inch an hour. We must harden our infrastructure. We cannot have a subway system that shuts down in a heavy rain event. That's unacceptable. But we also have to protect our coastline in this low-lying island, and we've done far too little of that, even in the decade since Sandy. You are not at the most vulnerable point here, but lower Manhattan, which flooded in Sandy, could easily flood again. And there's a process underway to essentially create a U around the southern tip of elevation with new parks. We're just starting that project. We're way behind. There's a proposal that the Army Corps of Engineers has to install a system of gates and barriers around vulnerable points of New York Harbor. That's still in the drawing board stages. We have much more work to do, but there's simpler things that can make a difference in the short term. A street tree with a cistern underneath it, this is called a bioswale, can absorb thousands of gallons of water. That prevents flooding. Playgrounds where the surface is permeable can absorb thousands of gallons of water. Rooftops, which have gardens, can absorb water that otherwise would have resulted in flooding down on the street. So there are steps we can take to make our city more resilient even while we wait for the multi-billion-dollar projects I described. But at the same time, we have to keep our eye on the long-term goal to slow climate change. And in New York City, that means breaking our dependence on fossil fuels, ensuring that our buildings transition off the use of fossil fuels, essentially that we electrify everything, from heating systems to fire trucks, so that we can at least have the option of drawing energy off renewable sources like hydropower and solar. We have to rethink our food system and the way that we process food waste. We barely compost in New York City. And so those food scraps go to landfill where they produce methane gas, which contributes to global warming. When you compost, you avoid that impact. But composting not only is not mandatory in New York City, it's not even an option in most buildings. Is it an option in Aspire? Could you compost here if you wanted to? Well, there you go, proving my point.
No, but I thought back a few years ago, the sanitation department was going to I lived in a different building at that time, They came to our building and asked if they would be willing to compost. They said yes, and it went into effect. But then when COVID came, they said they couldn't do that
Right.
any longer, and that was it.
Now, they are, they're fighting back now towards progress on composting. Not yet in Manhattan, though. Queens now, every single building has the option for composting. It's not mandatory, but every single building in Queens, big and small, now has the option. We want that in Manhattan. We don't have it yet. You can, look, anyone can collect it and hike to a farmer's market or something, so if you're really determined, but let's be honest, 99% of the public is not gonna do that. So it needs to be easier to compost. And that's, among other things, a global warming fight. So there's a lot more that we have to do. Manhattan and New York City should lead the way, and this is something that I'm gonna return to every single day as long as I'm in this office, because it really is ultimately the challenge of our time, and one that still today we're not doing enough to address.
And I think we have a question back here.
Well, I have two things I'd like you to comment on. One is, walking around in broad daylight, I've seen rats and mice in the city. So that, to me, is a big problem, at least locally here. And also, can you comment on the electric grid and what's being done to ensure with global warming that we will have enough power so that we can live in the city, have refrigeration and so on, and the air conditioning, which is needed.
Well, it's not your for both good questions. It's not your imagination. There has been an increase in the rat population. I don't know about the mice population, probably the same, but definitely documented increase in the rat population during COVID, which we think is mostly due to problems in trash management. That if you compost, the food scraps are not in a trash can where the rats can get it. Just to give one small example. They also, by the way, cut pickup of waste bins during COVID. And if you noticed waste bins overflowing on the street during COVID, that's why. Now that has been fixed. They're now doing 2 days a week, 2 times a day, 6 days a week on the street waste bins, which is the most we've ever had. So hopefully that'll help. But look, the bottom line is rats are mostly feeding off our trash. And if we manage trash better, if buildings manage trash better, the rat population declines. There are some great pilots right now for fully containerized trash, not the model of mounting, making a mountain of bags, but having sealed containers. These are very popular in Europe, where they're rat-proof, they're solid structures, and they don't block the sidewalk. So as we manage trash better, we're gonna have fewer rats. Your second question was on the
Electric grid.
Yeah, thank you. My concern on the electric grid is less in New York State, unlike Texas, is not supply, it is the source of that power and whether we're sourcing it from renewable sources. Someone can correct me if I'm wrong. I believe that our electric use has peaked some, and because of some efficiency measures that we're no longer increasing our per capita energy consumption in New York City, electrical consumption in New York City. I believe that's the case. The big fight is to transition off of dirty sources. And there are some exciting plans to do that by running transmission lines in from hydroelectric sources in Canada and Quebec. It takes a lot to run those lines in, and these are big engineering projects, but they're coming into New York City. So more and more of the energy that we're getting when we plug in, a higher percentage of it is going to be coming from renewable sources. We have a long way to go. This is a decades-long fight. We all need to pay more attention to it, but there are some exciting projects in New York City and state that give me some hope about us getting to those goals eventually.
Yes, sir?
I'm disappointed that this topic wasn't brought up, but we are facing a great deal of crime in New York, and in addition to that, a lack of probable police leaving their positions. We are low in that. So crime is a significant problem. And what do you feel can be done to improve that?
This is a real challenge, and we have to be honest about it. We've had a decline in shootings and homicides this year. Every other category is up. That's the numbers. So robberies, assaults, etc. are up. It's unacceptable. Even the level of shootings is unacceptable. But I just want to lay out where we are on the stats. And we need a full frontal assault on many levels. We need to do more to prevent guns from coming into the city. We need to do more to get guns that are here off the streets. We need to do more to make sure that kids never go down the path of picking up a gun in the first place by investing in after-school programs and youth development and job training and more. We have a mental health crisis and a homeless crisis, which are connected to some categories of crime, less the shootings, but some of what we're experiencing on the street. New York City, well, Manhattan lost 500 inpatient psychiatric beds in the last decade. It's too hard for people who need inpatient care to get it. And we need to expand the availability of inpatient psychiatric care in New York City and statewide. We have an opioid crisis, really now being fed by fentanyl, which is a potent and very inexpensive drug, which is infiltrating the market right now. It's also deadly.
From immigration?
The fentanyl? No. What do you mean?
Being brought over?
Well, some of it's made domestically, some of it's from all over the world, but it is opioid addiction is less being driven by pills as it was for the last 20 years, and more now it's fentanyl, which is in the market, and it's even in some drugs that you wouldn't expect it. It's not only in heroin.
The other problem is that people receive drugs like fentanyl from the internet, so a lot of the time it's just illicit supply chain, so it's not so much individuals bringing it as it's illicitly coming in through the mail.
Look, I'm not afraid to say that policing is part of the solution, and that police on the ground, community policing, officers are on the beat, who get to know the community, who know the store owners, is an effective strategy. We are 2,700 positions down in the department because of retirements and resignations. So that does impact the staff power.
Well, there was also the mayor.
This mayor?
Not this mayor.
Oh.
The previous one, who caused a great deal of problems with police numbers.
Yeah, well, this mayor, Mayor Adams, has, I think, offered strong rhetorical support for the NYPD. He's obviously a former officer himself.
Yes.
And I think that he has said we need both investment in the social services that make communities safer, but that policing is also part of the problem. We want to make sure that policing is fair, but that is part of the solution. So we have a lot of work to do on that. It's not acceptable that the numbers would continue to move in the wrong direction. I'm committed to this in Manhattan, and it's going to be a top priority for me for sure.
Committed to increasing the number of police?
Well, I certainly think that we need to fill those vacancies, and I think we need more cops on the beat, get them out of the cars, get them out of the station houses, get them talking to the community, get them on foot. All those strategies work, together with the kind of things that I mentioned, investment in social services as well. That's the multifaceted solution that we need.
I also kind of want to jump off of his question a little bit and have you explain a bit more about how guns are coming in through the iron pipeline, what we can be doing to disrupt the guns that are coming into New York City in the first place.
I mean, there's no guns made in New York City. So every gun being used in a crime here was made somewhere else. They are mostly purchased in 4 or 5 states: Virginia, North Carolina, Florida, Georgia, and Ohio. And they are brought in here by professional gun runners who drive south and fill up their trunks. Sometimes they fill up a duffel bag and get on a bus and sell them here for significant markups. Why it is that a gun store in Virginia would allow someone to buy 40 guns, To me, it boggles the mind. It's indefensible. And even legislation as sensible as only allowing you to buy one gun per day is not passing in these states, right? That alone would dramatically decrease the gun running, right? Because as I mentioned, this is driven by professionals who are loading up duffel bags and loading up their trunks. There does need to be more random checks at the points of entry, the bridges, and the Port Authority bus terminal. We need federal action ultimately to pass sensible gun laws. Why is it legal to purchase an assault rifle in New York City? You're not using an assault rifle to go deer hunting. We need federal action on that. So the city can't do it alone. One of the reasons why I want to elect Democrats federally is to have sane policy on guns, which we just have not been able to enact so far.
Thank you. Switching gears entirely before we wrap up, I have a completely personal question. How did you end up in politics? Because if I have this right, you majored in physics. I believe you speak at least 2 languages fluently. And then for reasons I don't understand, you transitioned to a lifetime in public service?
Wow. Thank you for that flattery disguised as a question, Chris. I appreciate that. I studied physics in college, decided I didn't want to live in a lab. I became a science teacher in the South Bronx. Teaching changed my life. It set me on a course of community work, started a nonprofit in Washington Heights, ran for office eventually, lost a couple times, and in 2013 became a New York City Council member representing Uptown, West Side, Washington Heights, West Harlem. Chaired the Parks Committee for my first term, chaired the Health Committee my second term, hence my passion for that topic. And last year ran borough-wide, and perhaps thanks to the votes of some of you in this room, won election to be Manhattan Borough President. So it's been a wonderful trajectory. Honestly, it's been a dream come true to be able to pursue this. And Borough President, to end where we began, is truly the best job in New York City. I have I'm totally independent. I have the resources to have an impact. I have the platform to speak out, and I represent the best borough in the universe. What could be better? And I represent Inspire as well, which is pretty cool. And so I hope this will not be the last time you have me here.
Absolutely not.
Okay.
You can find it back anytime. And we already have a series of requests, so I'm going to be in touch with you.
Oh, I know you will. I know you will.
Well, thank you so much for being here with us today. Let's give Mark a hand.
Thanks, everybody.
Did you turn your mic on?
Yes.
Otherwise, we'll roll right off and create a boom and everyone will be on board. Where are you going next?
The Intrepid. You know, the aircraft carrier.
Oh, you mean that? I thought there was like a club or something.
No, the actual Intrepid.
Well, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
What's your name?
Spencer Sherman.
Pleasure, Mr. Sherman. How long have you lived in New York City?
Pretty much all my life. Went to Columbia Medical School.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. And now it's on.
What kind of medicine did you practice?
I'm a ophthalmologist.
Oh, wonderful. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you for your service to healthcare.
Thank
Glad you
you.
stayed in New York.
Oh, thanks so much. Thanks so much. So I hope there is something increasing the number of police with I'm sure your hands.
We're gonna do what we can. Dr. Sherman, it's a pleasure. I appreciate you, sir. Okay. Hi. Good.
Thanks so much for coming. It was a pleasure.
Oh,
Thank you. You bet.
Hey, Mike.
Quite frankly, it was a bit of a
Yeah, I'm glad the coin landed on where it needed to.
All right.
Oh, appreciate that. I will spread the word.
Sure did.
Hi, nice to meet you. All right. Thank you.
Really a pleasure.
Okay, thank you. What's your name?
Susan Crown.
It's a pleasure, Susan. All right.
Susan's always here front row.
I like that enthusiasm. Nice to meet you. What's your name? How long have you lived in New York City? A newcomer. You came to the right place. It's a pleasure. Nice to meet you too. Really? What neighborhood did you grow up in?
I was born in
Wow. And you stayed nearby? Wow. You can still see the, is that the East River?
That's why I'm on the 19th floor facing.
You wanted to be able to see the river. That's wonderful. Thank you. Good to be here. Hi, I'm Mark. Hope you weren't disappointed.
Would you say your name was? Oh, your name? I'm Chris. Nice to meet you.
What neighborhood are you from? Middle East Side, okay. Okay. Back on the east side. You're still in the right borough. And that's the name. What's your name? Oh, of course. Yeah. Are you still doing journalism?
No, unfortunately, I had a couple of bones in my wrist that died, and so I came home and
Wow.
one handed, but I'm here in my apartment.
Okay. Where are you normally turning over to?
I'm from Houston, but I will not be going there. I'll be staying home.
Smart man. I like it.
I truly appreciate it. Thank you for
Music to my ears. Well, great to see you.
Yeah. It's been a few years. I've changed jobs since then.
Indeed. Great to reconnect.
Yes, and like I said, I mean, my victory is, I mean, some of those campaigns, I know that, like in the middle of the day at the lunch truck, we want volunteers in the streets. Citizens, so if you want to give me around with the information on how to get in touch with whoever's on
Okay.
the political side, obviously, the type of your governmental job.
Of course.
Yes, we have to segregate the
Firewall.
Yes.
Definitely I will.
Yeah, they have we haven't been in, I was working I'm told the people here on Rosh Hashanah that they do kosher style, which is basically, and you know, yeah, it's not extra. The rabbi's really good. And I went to the rabbi and he's like, yeah, he's like, don't worry about it. He's like, if you like the veg, you know, trucks everything, you need to be in healthcare facility, you need to be in your hands, you get from your doctor, your therapist, etc. He's like, it's fine. Tell him to take oil on the grill. And so I told him that. Yeah, he was just like, so, yeah, so like I said, you can get into that in the press.
Okay, I love it. Right, it was a pleasure.
Yeah, good seeing you.
Yeah.
This is going down to Main Street. Okay, this is.
Okay.